Everything was supposed to be perfect. The money was there, the platforms were there, the media attention was there, the sympathy was there, the royal connection was there. Yet somehow, instead of a triumphant Hollywood comeback, the conversation surrounding Meghan Markle seemed to spiral into something completely different. And according to critics, comedians, and even some former supporters, the moment that truly exposed the problem wasn't a royal interview, a Netflix show, or a podcast cancellation. It was when the jokes started landing a little too easily. Because once comedians smell weakness, they don't just tell jokes. They start revealing what audiences are already thinking but haven't fully said out loud. And that is exactly where this story begins.
I said Meghan Markle is, of course, a lifelong feminist, which she's demonstrated by marrying a prince and giving up her job.
What I discovered that she was hunting for a man in England. She wanted wealth and she wanted fame. And she targeted Harry.
And this was the most savage tick yet. I mean, they actually call her a tick. Watch this.
Yeah.
Okay. King Charles visited the U.S. to mark the 250th anniversary of American independence from Britain and to seek the release of a British hostage being held by an American
For years, Meghan and Harry were presented as a powerful modern brand, a couple breaking free, a couple building something new, a couple determined to prove they could thrive outside palace walls. The promises were enormous. The expectations were even bigger. But then, something strange happened. Instead of endless success stories, the headlines began focusing on disappointing numbers, canceled deals, criticism, and growing skepticism. Piece by piece, the fairy tale started colliding with reality, and people began asking a dangerous question. Was the problem bad luck, or was there something deeper happening beneath the carefully crafted image?
That's the title of her show, Love Meghan. For what? To watch? Who wants to watch Meghan Markle bake?
Then came a moment many people didn't see coming. What made this different was the tone. It wasn't outrage, it wasn't anger, it wasn't some explosive attack. It was almost worse. Calm amusement. The kind that suggests people have already made up their minds. Suddenly, comedians weren't treating Meghan and Harry as untouchable figures. They were treating them as material. And once that door opened, more and more voices rushed through it. One of the names drawing attention was Jimmy Carr. Known for delivering brutal observations with a completely emotionless expression, Carr has a unique talent. He can say something devastating while sounding like he's reading grocery prices. That's exactly what made his comments hit so hard.
Gosh, I work so hard.
Shut up, bitch. You're an idiot.
The audience laughed, but beneath the laughter was something else. Recognition. Because the joke wasn't really about royalty. It was about perception. Critics increasingly argued that Meghan and Harry had become less like members of a royal family and more like stars in an endless reality show where every controversy somehow generated another headline. Then came the observation that sent social media into overdrive.
Yeah, they were very worried about their safety, which I get that aspect of things. After 6 episodes, I wanted to attack them.
That line exploded because it summarized years of criticism in just a few seconds. Some viewers laughed because they thought it was funny. Others laughed because they thought it was accurate. Either way, the conversation was changing fast. Meanwhile, Hollywood wasn't exactly delivering the comeback many expected. Critics kept pointing toward the same issue. Opportunity after opportunity had arrived. Massive contracts, massive budgets, massive publicity. Yet the results rarely seemed to match the hype.
Meghan Markle was there, who's a huge celebrity.
Yeah, you guys love suits.
Specifically, Prince Harry loves suits.
Yeah.
He used it like Tinder.
That quiet judgment became impossible to ignore, not because one person said it, because so many people started saying versions of the same thing. Different commentators, different platforms, different audiences, yet somehow they kept arriving at similar conclusions. Then came another uncomfortable moment. The reaction itself became part of the story. People weren't just discussing the projects anymore, they were discussing why the projects weren't connecting, why the excitement seemed weaker than expected, why every new launch felt like it generated more debate than enthusiasm. And that question only became louder as critics pointed toward the opportunities Meghan had received. That is where the entire mystery deepened, because nobody could claim the opportunities weren't there. They were. Netflix, Spotify, global media attention, resources that countless aspiring entertainers could only dream about. Yet critics kept asking the same uncomfortable question.
William or Prince Harry?
Prince William or Prince Harry? Well, the royal family, right, if you can imagine, they're like our Kardashians. Prince Harry is very much our Kanye. He occasionally dresses as a Nazi, and he fucked up.
If all those advantages existed, why weren't the results speaking for themselves? Then came the Netflix era, and according to critics, this is where the gap between expectations and reality became impossible to hide. The numbers became part of the debate. The reviews became part of the debate. The rankings became part of the debate. Suddenly, every statistic was being examined like evidence at a trial. Every disappointing performance was treated as another clue in a growing investigation. And perhaps most damaging of all, the jokes kept multiplying. Because in Hollywood, failure can sometimes be forgiven. But becoming a punchline, that's a much harder reputation to escape.
Meghan say they'd now like to split their time between spending your money in the UK and spending your money in Canada.
While Meghan and Harry continue trying to reshape their image, critics, commentators, and comedians seem to be building an entirely different narrative. And what happened next would turn that narrative into something even more explosive. But the Netflix questions were only the beginning, because once critics started looking at the results, they started looking at everything else too. Suddenly, Spotify was back in the spotlight. The much-publicized partnership that was once presented as a major step into media influence ended with uncomfortable headlines and even more uncomfortable commentary. What made people stop and stare wasn't merely that the partnership ended. Big business deals collapse all the time. It was the language that followed. The comments didn't come from anonymous social media users. They came from people connected to the very companies that had signed the checks. And when critics heard words like grifters entering the conversation, they sensed blood in the water. The image of an unstoppable power couple was being replaced by a very different narrative, one built around questions rather than achievements. Then another pattern emerged.
Donald Trump has had enough of them. He's privately savaged Prince Harry during King Charles's visit to America. Trump remarked to a British visitor when the conversation turned to Harry, "Can you take him back?" Everyone is fed up with the grifters. I mean, Trump has clearly had enough of the woe is me, ginger and
privacy. Again and again, the word privacy appeared at the center of public discussions. Yet critics pointed out what they believed was a contradiction. The couple frequently spoke about wanting less attention while simultaneously participating in projects that generated even more headlines. For critics, this became one of the easiest targets for satire. And once satire takes hold, facts almost stop mattering because the joke itself becomes the story. That is exactly what happened when South Park entered the conversation. In a matter of seconds, an animated parody managed to summarize years of public debate. Whether people agreed with it or not was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that millions were talking about it. And the more they talked, the more the perception spread. Then came another issue that kept resurfacing. Critics argued that ordinary actions were often presented as extraordinary discoveries. Small moments became major revelations. Everyday habits became headline-worthy content. To supporters, this was harmless lifestyle branding. To critics, it was evidence of a larger problem. They believed the substance wasn't matching the presentation. And every time another example surfaced, the debate reignited. Comedians, commentators, and television personalities all seemed to circle back to the same theme. Not necessarily scandal, not necessarily wrongdoing, but disappointment. The feeling that enormous opportunities had produced surprisingly little impact. That perception became even more dangerous when high-profile comedians began turning serious controversies into punchlines. Because once an audience starts laughing, the emotional power of a narrative begins to weaken. Chris Rock's remarks became one of the most discussed examples. Suddenly, a subject that had dominated international headlines was being reframed through comedy. For supporters, it was unfair. For critics, it was validation. Either way, the public conversation shifted. And once it shifted, it became difficult to pull back. Then something even more revealing happened. Jimmy Carr started drawing historical comparisons. Not because history repeats perfectly, but because patterns make people curious. When references to Wallace Simpson entered the discussion, the story stopped being framed as a modern celebrity controversy and started looking, at least to some observers, like another chapter in a much older royal saga. Whether the comparison was fair became less important than the fact that people were making it. Suddenly, questions about influence, power, loyalty, and royal disruption returned to the center of the conversation. Meanwhile, another contrast kept appearing: Prince William. Again and again, commentators noted how differently the brothers were being discussed. Even Carr's own stories seemed to reflect that divide. One brother was often described through criticism and controversy, the other through anecdotes of professionalism and stability. Fair or unfair, those comparisons fueled endless discussion, and every comparison seemed to widen the perception gap. Then came Kelly Osbourne's remarks. Unlike comedians performing routines, she spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she was simply stating an obvious truth. Her argument was brutal in its simplicity. The opportunities were there. The contracts were there. The platform was there. So where were the results? For critics, that question became impossible to ignore, because if every setback could be blamed on critics, the media, the monarchy, or bad timing, eventually people would start asking when accountability entered the equation. And that may be the real reason this entire saga continues generating headlines. It was never just about Netflix, never just about Spotify, never just about royal drama. It became a larger debate about privilege, opportunity, image, and expectation. Supporters see two people trying to build a life on their own terms. Critics see two people repeatedly failing to deliver on extraordinary advantages. The divide remains enormous, but perhaps the most revealing part of all is this: years later, the debate is still growing louder instead of fading away. Every joke creates another headline. Every headline creates another argument. Every argument creates another wave of attention. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise sits the question nobody seems able to answer. Is this the collapse of a carefully crafted brand? Or is it simply another chapter in a story that hasn't reached its final act yet? Because if the past few years have proven anything, it's that the next twist may already be waiting just around the corner.